and gentlemen, in just a moment, Bob Greaves, the Unconventional pastor, shares his thoughts on the Christian point of view of emotions. It should be a moving experience, so stay tuned.
Well, good evening. My name is Bob Greaves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. And tonight, a little bit of a change of direction. I'm going to be talking a little bit tonight about something I've been doing some casual reading on. Originally, tonight I was hoping to have a particular guest who was going to discuss with me their view of the Bible as being the inspired, inerrant Word of God. And I was hoping to have a conversation with them. Not necessarily a debate, just a conversation where they could explain to me why that's what they understand, and I would offer them some of the reasons why I find that understanding is uncompelling, inaccurate, or misunderstood, versus taken out of context, mistranslated, etc. But anyway, that didn't happen, and I might say I don't know that it ever will. It might, but hopefully there'll be an opportunity to have that conversation again with this person. But I'm hoping, though, that if you know somebody who'd be willing to have a respectful conversation live and on the air about that issue, I'd be more than happy to entertain the idea of them as a guest. So if you know of anyone that would be willing to do that, somehow, make contact with me. Let me know who that person might be and that they're willing. So in the meantime, tonight I've been looking at some of the things that traditional Christians have been saying about emotions. As you know, I've spoken on that topic a number of times, and my understanding of emotions is, in my opinion, based upon some of the scholarship that we have in the study of psychology, human development, et cetera, but that it is in some sense not the same as the general cultural attitude in our country about emotions. Of course, not everyone is necessarily familiar with the kind of research that is currently going on in mental health fields concerning emotions, so that it's not necessarily worked its way into the culture at large. So my views are somewhat different from the culture in general, but radically different from where some Christians would be in their own particular unique view. And of course, originally, some of my interest in looking into and studying and the understanding and managing and regulating of human emotion came from the fact that I thought that my own Christian experience was one that was impeding my own personal development of a healthy relationship with my own emotions. And so as I found myself abandoning for intellectual reasons my previous fundamentalism, I also found myself reconnecting with my emotional sense of things and the emotional apparatus within me to come to a very different view of what really is going on when emotions are that which I'm experiencing than from what I was led to believe when I was a Christian. Now, of course, not all Christians have the same view. Just as there's many different views within the Christian world about a wide variety of topics. People will, some arguing that you speak in tongues, you don't speak in tongues. Some will argue that baptism is perfectly fine with sprinkling, and others would argue that no, it's got to be immersion. Some would argue that it's even wonderful to baptize babies, and others say, no, just believers. And so, those who profess to be Christians, even serious biblical Christians, don't always agree on these on a wide variety of topics, and so it's not as if there is a single Christian view of emotions, but very common uh, is the belief that emotions are somehow something spiritual, and that the feelings and emotions that we have are somehow derived spiritually from a root source, which is either Satan or God. And this is kind of the idea that I know that I was taught. And so that our emotions really are, in a sense, the spirit within us speaking, and that spirit is deriving its energy from either our unity with Satan or our unity with Jesus. And this is the way that was understood. Certainly not all Christians would agree with that or understand it in that manner. But many would think that God is somehow pulling the strings within us to create in us certain emotions. In fact, some would even argue that that is exactly how Jesus and God lead us into his will. For example, I've seen some people who would quote a scripture verse which says things like, let this peace of God rule in your hearts. And they would understand that not as I do. Uh, when I see that verse, let the peace of God rule in your hearts. I see it as being a sense of stability, a sense of quietness, a sense of the urgency of weird concerns and deep stresses, somehow just kind of being relaxed, and that's what that's talking about. But some people would actually see that the way you're to determine what God's will for your life is by contemplating various different possibilities, and the possibility that brings you peace. That's the Spirit of God talking to you and showing you which way to go. An interesting concept. I personally think that that is very very foolish. I do think that if what you're contemplating is something that you don't have peace about, that there may be some serious problems concerning it that you need to deal with. But as I would understand it, I wouldn't call that peace as much as a sense of delighted coherence. And I think that when we're contemplating a plan, particularly if we've genuinely and thoroughly thought about what the plan is, what it involves doing, what it's going to cost you to do it, what's going to be the likely outcome of such an effort, how it could go wrong, what you're going to do if it does. Whenever you've thoroughly considered a potential course of action and having given it some genuine consideration and careful thought, uh, if you feel good about it, that I understand to be the fact that in all of your considerations, you're not personally aware of any reason why this isn't a good idea. That doesn't mean it's a great idea. It just means you're not personally aware of it, which tells me that it's as good a plan as you can come up with, but you still might want to take this further and bounce this off a few other people who are not you, people who don't think like you, people who think differently, and see if they discover within it the same coherence that you have. And chances are they might not, for several different reasons. Among them could be they're not you. That doesn't mean that it's a bad idea either. It could be a bad idea for them, but nonetheless, I see that all as part of the decision making process. But I don't think that the fact that a person has peace about a contemplated action is in any manner any indication that it's God's will for their life. You certainly should be hesitant to do things you're not comfortable doing in terms of, I don't know if that really makes sense. And you may find yourself at times in a conundrum when it's time to act and you're not really comfortable with any of the options. I think that that can happen to us from time to time, and we might need to decide, can I delay a decision on this? Is that wise? Or if I need to act, if this is the time to act and action is required, uh, it might be necessary to accept the lack of clarity and realize that, well, this is the best decision I can make. And I need to be prepared to realize that it isn't going to work so well. But at it's time to act. It's time to make a decision, and this is the best one I can make. And to accept that life sometimes comes down to that. I don't see this as having anything to do with the leading of God or the filling of the Holy Spirit or anything like that. But nonetheless, there's a lot of people who use that verse for that very purpose, where the Holy Spirit will lead you through giving you peace. I think that that's a misconstruction. It's an artificial way of reading that verse. May the peace of God rule in your hearts. Anyhow, I've seen people take other verses, and I was even reading a website today, last couple of days actually, looking at some things that let's see, what was the website? I wrote it down here. Gotquestions.org, and it had one section there on managing emotions, and of course, I was impressed with the website in that at least it was not some of the old-fashioned views of emotions that I had been more familiar with from Christian circles, but it wasn't necessarily something that I would strongly agree with either. But nonetheless, they certainly acknowledge that if we as human beings didn't have emotions, life would be kind of strange, and and I think the website talks about how what's Captain Spock from Star Trek like creatures we would be. It's amazing how today most people, when you hear the word Spock, only think of Captain Spock. But I know when I was growing up, there was a guy named Dr. Spock who'd actually written a book on child rearing, and it was a terrible book. We won't talk much about that, but sometimes we had to clarify who we are talking about when we say the name Spock. But anyhow, first of all, uh, he does present an argument, however, that without directly stating, it tends to indicate that our emotions are precipitated by our spiritual condition, and that depending on what that spiritual condition is, we're going to have certain emotions that we can rely on versus emotions that we can't rely on. And I think he points out a few things. I'm assuming it's a he, and I'm not sure who wrote the article. Maybe I shouldn't assume that. Uh, there is a recognition in this website that emotions are in some ways an indirect precipitation of other stimulus, which is sort of correct as I understand it, but not actually, not completely. I would argue that the buffer between emotions and certain stimulus in the world is one where there is a correlation, but the separation is so significant as to not be direct enough to attribute it to things going on in the world. I've talked about that earlier on other shows, so I'm not going to explain that right now. And I realize I said it very obtusely, but we'll worry about that at another time. My earpiece keeps falling out for some reason in my ear here tonight. Anyhow, but this argument was being made that somehow our spiritual condition is in. And one of the verses that was quoted there was this one from Romans chapter 8, verses 9 and 11, where it says, "You, however, are not in the realm of the flesh, but are in the realm of the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, they do not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you." Now, of course, this verse was quoted as an attempt to direct this towards our spiritual condition, and that our consciousness of our life is very much filled with our emotions and how we feel about how things are going, evidently. And so this was somehow, I guess, that connection that was being made. But the argument was sort of put forward that that when our emotions are truly directed by the Spirit of God, that our emotions are reliable, and when they're not, when we're in the flesh, when we're not directed by the Spirit of God, our emotions are going to be very deceiving, and our emotions are very powerful, and so they're going to lead us one way or the other. Now, that's a concept that I would completely disagree with. For one, as you've heard me talk about this before, I would argue that emotions are 100% reliable all the time, but they are not reliable for the things we think they are. And that we have a radical misunderstanding of what precipitates emotions and what they are therefore saying or implying, and what it is we ought to infer from them. And too many people regard emotions as if they are inept reality detectors. That is, sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't. And I argue that emotions don't have any contact with reality, and they are not reality detectors, inept or otherwise. They don't know anything about reality. The closest emotions get to reality is your emotions are a response to what you are doing with reality based on your focus and perspective. And your emotions are simply a reflection of that, but they're a reflection of that based on the value and the significance placing on reality, and has nothing to do with what that reality is in the first place. Doesn't matter. For example, if something you perceive is that which creates within you a sense of happiness, your emotions have no clue what it is that makes you happy. But if you're seeing something that is as you see it, something where things are working together well, where the things that you really value are arriving in a way that is just wonderful as you would evaluate it, well, then because you're perceiving whatever in such a manner as that value, the emotion of happiness is necessarily therefore going to be precipitated without regard to what it is you're happy about. The emotion you experience is a response specifically to the character and nature of the perspective and focus that you have, without regard to what that focus or perspective actually is. And so I would argue that emotions have no contact with reality whatsoever. They are instead a response to what you're doing with reality. And because occasionally what you're doing with reality is realistic, it's not surprising that sometimes your emotions seem to be in sync with what is going on in reality. And because sometimes your perspective and your focus is not really accurate, not really honest, not really, it's no wonder that at those times your emotions are somehow out of sync with reality, because your emotions are still in sync with what you're doing with reality. And when you're not doing with reality very well, your emotions are an accurate reflection of that not doing very well with reality. So, and in that, they are 100% very accurate. So, I would argue, contrary to this particular point of view, that emotions are 100% dependable and 100% accurate, but they are dependable and accurate only about being a reflection with what you are doing with reality. It is utterly impossible for what you feel to at any point in time ever be inconsistent with the way you perceive and focus upon your reality. It's impossible for them to be any different. It's always possible for you to perceive reality in a way that isn't quite honest, isn't quite accurate, where you're ignoring certain things you should be paying attention to, dismissing certain things that are really not all that dismissible, or focusing on things that aren't really there in the way you want to see them, or where you've really stretched or twisted things in order to see it that way. And it's as if we sometimes observe our world and our reality with a volume control in our hands, as it were. When things that we really want to focus on are going on, we kind of turn up the volume. When things are going on that we don't want to pay attention to, we turn down the volume so that we can kind of live in our reconstructed fantasy world that is only loosely based on what's going on around us. And our emotions will certainly follow pace with that. But anyhow, so I don't agree that the test of emotions being accurate has anything to do with whether you're filled with the Spirit or walking in the flesh, as it may be understood. That no, 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 no. That has nothing to do with it at all. But this is a common Christian teaching. And then, of course, they would then take this concept of, if you're walking in the Spirit and you're in the Spirit and all that, they would then almost always bring this over to the fruit of the Spirit. And here, Excuse me, I got something in my mouth. I need to get out. Um, the fruit of the spirit, as they would understand, this of course comes from Galatians, chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, where it talks about how the fruit of the spirit is love, joy, peace, long suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. And then it ends with saying, against such things there is no law. And by that I take it that means that nobody's really too worried about anybody doing too much of that stuff, and that's true. When it comes to our relationships, wherever we perceive there to be any of these things, love, joy, peace, and whatever, no, hardly anybody except Bro Bap really upset about it. But I would want to argue that not everything in this fruit of the spirit is actually an emotion. That's not what it is. Uh, and I would also further understand this concept of fruit of the Spirit as being an analogy. It's an analogy that when one is walking in those things that seem to really be important to Jesus, when one is embracing those things that seem to truly be uh, consistent with and important to a spiritually healthy view of our existence, that that the outcome of that is eventually going to lead to certain you know uh, behaviors and states of mind, that some of them could be a little bit emotional, some could not be. But one of them, of course, the first one that's mentioned is love. And if you've heard me ever talk about this before, I argue that love is not an emotion at all. Doesn't it is not that love doesn't have anything to do with emotions, but love itself is not an emotion. As I understand it, particularly as it's talked about oftentimes, even in the biblical text, that the love that is here, that is being spoken about, particularly the love of God, is a love of recognizing that something is um, inarticulately valuable, to the point that its value is difficult to articulate, and in such a manner as it compels us to want to behave in a manner that doesn't violate that value, and that even celebrates and lifts up that value and promotes that value. And that when we love other people, it is because we are conscious of how valuable their existence really is, and how we want to uh, behave in a manner that contributes to the well-being of their existence and the optimal uh, experience of that existence in terms of its value. And that therefore love is really an awareness of great value, that is so powerful that it gets commingled with our motivations, in terms of what it is we might be desirous of doing and what it is we would desire not to do. And that love is therefore more of a value system that involves our decision and priority uh, organization within us. And although this will incorporate a great number of emotions in the process, frustration when things that are loved are not, things aren't going well for that, uh, uh, anger when that which we love is violated or harmed or threatened, uh, various emotions that we will have. If you have children and you love your children, and you value them very much, you will find that depending on how they're behaving, depending on how things are going for them, depending on if they are ill or well, or struggling for their lives, or dealing with the sickness, that the amount of emotion you can go through is quite intense. But when somebody you love is in difficulty and harm, or perhaps in danger, the way you can worry, or in deep concern have anxiety concerning them, these emotions are an outworking of that love. But love itself is not this emotion, and any of the emotions that might be appropriate to the way you perceive the condition and ongoing existence of that which you love will create a variety of corresponding emotions. So although love is definitely a fruit of the Spirit. Love is not an emotion. In fact, I would say that when one is in touch with their spiritual self, they begin to realize that existence is a very valuable thing for human beings. And by the way, I don't think that being spiritual in that sense necessarily even requires that the person who experiences that sense of value be a person who would call themselves a theist or think that God has anything to do with it. That's not the point. But it is a value system that is based upon the perception of great and inarticulate value. It's not an emotion. Joy is in many ways really very emotional, and so I can see that. Uh, Peace uh, is a sense of an awareness that there really is no hostility, and that instead there's a great deal of concord, that there's a great deal of getting along, or that the circumstances and situations that are not concordant or situations that are hostile will work themselves out so that one is not in any manner worried about the inevitable eventual outcome. And sometimes we can see situations we're not really happy with, very concerned about, but we still believe this is going to work out. This is going to work out. And we can have peace in that. So in some ways, peace also comes from not just an emotion, but a perspective that is it's the emotion that you might say is precipitated by that perspective. And forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Self-control is, in a sense, a maturity based upon a deeper and more realistic view of oneself, one's actions, and the kind of actions that one is required to have in response to the world and the sort of person one is in the world. And so that's in some ways, it's going to involve a great deal of emotions. But anyhow, this fruit of the Spirit is not what I would call an emotional fruit of the Spirit. It's not as if the Spirit is in there pushing buttons in us, causing us to have emotions. The truth is, in all of this that's spoken of in Galatians 5:22 and 23, at no time do any emotions that might be involved ever happen as the result of anything other than, and you've heard me talk about this, the four dynamics inside of us that create our emotions are: number one, our general state of health; number two, our capacity to perceive reality; number three, the particular focus that we have, those things that we are paying attention to, those things we're dismissing and not paying attention to, and the significance that we have biosemiotically acquired in our history about those objects of thought that are currently within our currently within our focus. So perspective, focus, capacity to perceive reality, and our general state of health. These are the things that determine what we feel. And in these, the fruit of the Spirit here, there's a sense here in which the outcome of this fruit of the Spirit, at no time does it ever involve an emotion that is precipitated by anything other than those four dynamics working together. I see here we have a viewer comment. Let me take a look and see what it says here. If emotions are an accurate gauge of anything, does that mean that everyone is qualified to interpret that gauge accurately? And if not, shouldn't we still advise caution? Good question. Excellent question. No, you're right that simply because you know the emotions are 100% accurate as a gauge of what we're doing with reality. Not everyone is capable of doing that well. In fact, there's actually I was reading about it earlier this week. Uh, there's actually a character condition. Um, what is it was some like I can't remember what the name of it was. It's a long word, but it referred to people who have difficulty identifying and expressing their feelings. And there are some people who, less than 10% of the population is can go through various different personality profile tests that indicate that they are people who have a difficulty identifying and expressing emotions. Now, that shouldn't be misunderstood as saying that that's not saying that these are people who don't have emotions. They have emotions, they just have difficulty identifying and expressing what they are. And there's some people who have this linguistic impediment between what they feel and how to talk about it, and how to identify it and organize it. That there is within the population a certain number of people who possess this difficulty more greatly than others. And so we're not all equally adept at doing this. However, I think that also the fact that we in our culture tend to misapply what precipitates emotions. I mean, think about it. If you watch billiard balls, and somebody hits the cue ball using the cue stick, and you see the cue stick hit the the cue ball, and then that ball hits other balls and they start bouncing around. If you're a person rather adept at mathematics and geometry, you can begin to appreciate very quickly the relationship between how that ball is hit, where it strikes other balls, and how those balls then move in other directions as a result of it. Um, so that you can see the sequence of events as it moves on. uh, if people misattribute what precipitates their emotions, they're going to work that concept through quite incorrectly. If you don't understand the geometric and mathematical relationships going on at the pool table, then when you see the balls move, you're not necessarily going to be able to work it backwards to see how what happened to the cue stick really is the ultimate cause. You might attribute it to other things. Like if you can't see that, you might think the guy hits the cue ball and all he does is he gives the cue ball energy, but somehow his mind then directs where he wants the balls to go. You might think it's magic or something, but if you're a person who understands physics well enough, you can then see that there is a direct relationship here. And so not everybody possesses these aptitudes to appreciate quite clearly what might be going on. And so this is also true with emotions, that although emotions are precipitated by these four dynamics working together: your general state of health, capacity to perceive reality, your current focus, and your perspective about the objects currently within your focus, that although these are the four dynamics that lead to your emotional state, not all people necessarily understand how these things operate. And to the degree they don't, they're not necessarily going to be able to assess what it is that this tells them. So it takes some skill. It takes some, but I'll tell you, the more you work at it, the better you get at it. Just as true with anything. The more you do it, the more you get a feel for what you're doing. And I think it's always good to, compare notes with other people, particularly if they're knowledgeable people. And if they're not knowledgeable people, comparing notes with them might actually only add to your confusion. But no, it's just because this is the relationship that exists doesn't qualify anybody in any manner to necessarily read the gauge and know what it's talking about. It's kind of like, if you were to go to the hospital and have a number of tests taken to do blood work, and the results come back. Well, it shows you that to hear the amount of iron in your blood. We've got a count here of this particular. And I'm not a blood. I'm not a phlebotomist. I don't understand any of that stuff. But you can get a bunch of data. Well, that data may be true, but that doesn't tell you anything about what's going on in your blood. It doesn't. If you're not trained in this stuff, you might not have any clue what any of these numbers really mean. If what's high blood pressure? If you hear a reading that you're 220 over 90, if you don't know anything about blood pressure, how would you know that's high? So you'd have to know something about the data you're trying to read. You know something about the gauge and what it implies, what it infers. So anyway, interpreting even the gauge accurately doesn't mean you even know what it implies. Should people always move on with caution? We always are growing in understanding, but I think that if you're headed down the right path, given familiarity, given experience, also discovering who's useful in your life to give you wise advice and help you to understand what you're thinking and feeling means or doesn't. That can be very helpful. That can be very useful. This is part of what happens in relationships, and we ask people for advice all the time. And sometimes how we feel is a part of what we express while we're looking for that advice, and that can sometimes be a very significant part of whether or not they advise us this or advise us that. And so, yeah, it I don't see a necessary connection between the accuracy of the gauge, even the ability to read it accurately, and therefore knowing what to do about it. It's the connection isn't all that solid. Another viewer comment: mental health professionals are good for helping individuals work through and interpret important emotional responses. Many times they can be. Um, this is true. But I'll tell you, it is amazing to me how many mental health professionals can go through their entire education and a career of significant length, and they never once ever ask the question, what are emotions and where do they come from? I've known a number of psychologists and social workers who live in this fantasy world that all of our emotions are a result of the stimulus that we experience in the outside world rather than the interpretation we give to that stimulus. And they go through their whole careers. For example, I've known of certain social workers who will tell you if you were spanked, you were abused. And I think that is an absolutely ludicrous and unintelligent remark. Now, I'm not in favor of spanking, but I can tell you this: there have been plenty of people who were not abused by spanking, but were rather loved. And by that, here's what I'm saying: I think that there are some parents who, when they spanked because they really thought this is what they should do. They didn't spank to vent their anger. They spanked to express their concern and their desire to correct. And I think there's many children who experience their having been spanked as exactly that, as an attempt of the parent to kind of regulate the child's behavior because they cared about the child. Now, what I'm saying is, I don't think that spanking in and of itself is an appropriate or productive or a proper way to go about child rearing. But I can tell you this: if a parent spanked in that attitude and the child experienced that attitude, that will be a child who felt loved. That will be a child who was not in any manner psychologically harmed by that behavior. And here it is, because you see the stimulus of being spanked. It all depends on what you think that spanking means and what you think it says about you, your perspective on focusing upon that. And entirely, whether or not this ends up being psychologically and emotionally harmful to you depends completely on your on what parts of it you focus on and what your perspective is about it. That's what's going to harm you. And I think it's true that the one fellow who said this to me, Dr. Michael Kimmy, when he said it to me, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Because you see, I grew up in a home where there was a great deal of emotional abuse. And I, as a young adult, was a very destroyed, dysfunctional person. I couldn't keep a job. I couldn't deal with things. Life was overwhelming. I had a tremendous amount of self-loathing. And when Dr. McKimmey said to me, Bob, it's true that a lot of the things that were done to you were terrible things. A lot of things said to you in hypercriticism were devastating criticisms. But the truth is, none of that ever harmed you until you gave it credibility and you thought it actually really said something about you. That's when it harmed you. And since you are the one who, and I can understand why a child would do that, because you lack the critical thinking skills and the knowledge and the background to realize that your dad was actually full of crap when he was criticizing you, that it's quite understandable you draw those conclusions that these are somehow valid statements about you. But you're the one who decided they were valid, and that's when it harmed you. And you're the one who can decide now that they're not valid. And that this, working that through and going back through all of those experiences that I had gone through that destroyed me and reevaluating them with that kind of an attitude, And it took a long time. I'd say it took me 3 or 4 years of working through a lot of those things before I could find a better way of concluding and what I thought it said about me and what I thought it said about my dad and what it said about my mother. When I finally worked that through, though, I found that a lot of those problems just kind of dissolved. They evaporated. They just weren't there, and there was instead this newfound strength and dignity of person and what have you that was completely restored because it wasn't what happened to me. It was what I thought what happened to me said about me. And now that I had a completely different view of what it says about me, those things that had happened to me were no longer harming me. As strange as it might seem. So, anyway, I think that mental health professionals can help. Many gifted people can help you in that way, and thank God that there are some people who can help us through that sort of thing. They're very valuable to us, but don't kid yourself. You know, there's a lot of people who work their ways through credential and they understand the book learning and they can pass the tests and they can get the credentials and get the license and do this and that, and they don't really get it at all, and they're not going to really help a lot of people very much. But anyway, that's so it can be a mixed bag there, and I'd caution you in that respect. Um, you know, the the sense here, though, and where I want to get back to where we're talking about is that uh, when the Christian community perceives emotions as being somehow the outworking of the Holy Spirit in our lives, I think that this is still removing from us a sense of responsibility that we have to take for how we feel. Um, I do believe that emotions are involuntary. I do think that they're a very healthy thing to have. And I believe that whatever you're feeling, you need to feel it. You need to embrace it and you need to own it. And you need to be honest about the fact that what you're feeling does say something about your focus, your perspective, and that it's in some ways mitigated by your capacity to perceive reality and your current state of health. I think you need to be honest about that. I don't think that necessarily willing to be honest about that is always going to give you the right answers, but it's certainly going to help keep you in a better direction in dealing with it, and that can help you. But because you have to realize that it's your focus, it's your perspective, it's your validation of what you think these things mean. That these are the things your emotions are a reflection of, and so therefore you need to be 100% honest about the fact that this is your focus, this is your perspective, and this is why you feel that way. And if your focus and perspective is correct, then this is how you're supposed to feel and how you should be proud to feel, happy to feel, dignified to feel, no matter what that feeling is. And if your focus and perspective is something you find is incorrect, as soon as you are able to rework that to a more correct perspective, a more correct focus, you will find that doing so automatically changes the way you feel. For example, I remember one time having a conversation with one of my employers once, where she was talking about Bach, and his music, and I said something about how mathematical a lot of Bach's music was, and she thought I was trying to say something critical and unkind about Bach. And as she heard me that way, she was getting disturbed and perturbed with me. But as soon as, and she even said so, but as soon as I was expressing that I thought that Bach had a unique awareness of how the 12 tone system, as he understood it, was very mathematically put together in terms of the vibrations per second of these notes, and that he sometimes built his melodies around an appreciation of the manipulation of those numbers, that he was really very mathematical in his creativity, bringing a lot of math to his music. She began to see that, oh no, see, I was really trying to compliment his genius, and I think Mozart was even better at it than that, because he could do it so subtly you didn't realize he's being mathematical. Uh, but nonetheless, as soon as she perceived what I was saying as having a different purpose, a different intent, and a different significance, she was no longer offended. And I didn't have to talk her down out of being offended once she understood me differently. Once she understood me differently, her feelings just automatically changed because that's the way it is. Your feelings are always a reflection of your focus and perspective. So if your focus and perspective changes significantly, your emotions will automatically change with them. Now, sometimes it can take a while. Uh, uh, because some emotions possess a great deal of inertia. Let me give you an example of that, a thing that happened to me that taught me how much inertia emotions can have. There was a time when I was studying, I was going to school at the time, and I was studying for, I think I was actually writing a paper for a psychology class I was taking. And I'm up in my attic where my office was at that time, and I'm just studying away. And it was a hot day, and I have the windows open to keep the air moving through. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like a gunshot outside my house, and I mean, it was one of those deep, full, sudden blasts and an explosion. And someone ran to my bottom door there and said, "Bob, I think somebody's been shot." And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, somebody's been shot in front of my house." And I look out the window, and sure enough, there's this fellow lying down in the street, just face down in the street, and he's starting to writhe around in deep pain. And I see other people who were apparently somewhere near him, and they're all running to their houses and just getting out of the way. And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, there's been a shooting." And so I called the police right away, and the police officer, he was so cool. I said, I live here at blah blah blah, and I think somebody's been shot in front of my house. And the police officer, was the desk sergeant, said to me, "And what makes you think that someone has been shot in front of your house?" Well, I told him what had happened, and he of course sends cars over there because they're already being sent. I didn't know that, but anyway, he's trying to get more information from me. And it turns out I don't know what really happened. That was just the way I experienced it. Well, as it turned out, there was an idiot whose car was parked in front of my house, who wasn't sure why his truck wouldn't start. And so he had opened up the hood, and he was using a Bic lighter to see if he could see the level of the water in his car battery. And the car battery exploded. And of course, the people running away were people who got some acid on them, and so everyone was concerned. But there was not a gunshot going on. But until the police got there, and I didn't dare go out in front because I didn't know what was going on, I, for a good 5 minutes, was living under the impression that somebody had been shot in my front yard. Now, this is not a settling thing. You don't want people being shot in your own front yard. You don't want guns going off that close to you. And there have been other times when police had been there with guns drawn in the street there because of other things going on. You don't need any of this. Anyhow, I found that even though I discovered that, this is an idiot trying, by the way, I found out this is the second time he'd exploded a car battery that way. Some people never learn. But nonetheless, for 3 or 4 days, I found myself emotionally recovering from somebody having been shot in my front yard, even though that's not what happened. Because I believed that was what was going on, certain dynamics were at work and thrust forward inside of me that still had to kind of work their way out until they came to a halt. And I found that for several days, I was still going through the recovery process of something that I actually realized never happened. But I'm going through the recovery process of dealing with the emotions that I had as a result of thinking that it happened. And sometimes very intense emotions can do that to you. It takes a while. They really set in motion certain cognitive dynamics that don't just suddenly stop because you now think differently. So there can be a rather significant latency and time to work these things through. Wow, what an experience that was when I discovered that. It was very enlightening to me to see that. Anyhow, I would want to caution you that as Christians, that if you want to understand emotions, I would recommend that you're going to do far better by really paying attention to what the academic world has to say. And not that the academic world is always right, but there's a lot of very good information out there concerning emotions. and how they operate, how they are precipitated, and what they say about our perspective and our focus, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would recommend you do that instead of trying to ascribe them some sort of magical thing that God or Satan is trying to do inside of you. It just isn't what's going on. Anyhow, there we go. That's all I have to share with you tonight. My name is Bob Graves. They call me the Unconventional Pastor. Thank you for giving me some of your time and letting me chit chat with you about that. And thank you for your comments. We'll see you later. Take care.